Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, a treasure trove of data was found on an open FTP site, leaving countless AMI BIOS users open to attack. Plus, we'll take a look at PunkSPIDER, answer a big batch of your questions, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 105 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on April 11th, 2013. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible Scale Engine. Go check them out at ScaleEngine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hello, sir. Welcome to episode 105.
Yes.
Big show today, Alan. We've got a couple of topics in the news story that I have been itching to find out more about. You've been teasing me for a little while. I won't give away any secrets, but I've been kind of sitting on it, waiting for us to get to them, and I'm really looking forward to those topics, and I think they're going to pique our audience's interest as well. Plus, we've got some announcements later on in the show and some great feedback and an awesome roundup, so everybody stay tuned for all of that. But Alan, without further ado, why don't we get underway with our first story? You going to tell me about PunkScan?
Yes. So there's a new distributed web application vulnerability scanner and attached to a search engine, basically. So Hyperion Grey, which is a group or whatever, announced their new project where they would connect their open source vulnerability scanner. Right, it scans the websites and finds SQL injection vulnerabilities and things like that.
Sure.
Called PunkScan. They would connect that to an Apache Hadoop cluster and distribute it and set it loose on the whole internet. So it's like most web application scanners we've seen, basically, you point them at one website and they work for a long time and they get stuck in loops because they're not very good at telling what's a page and what's just the same page with a different parameter or whatever. And they crash and things like this. So it's never been really useful for the internet scale. So anyway, PunkScan has now been set up to use this Hadoop cluster and run on the entire internet.
Wow.
And the goal of the project is to highlight the abysmal state of security on the internet, specifically websites. The scanner specifically targets websites that are vulnerable to SQL injection, blind SQL injection, and cross-site scripting. Right, so SQL injection is where some parameter that the user enters gets put into the SQL query that builds the page unsanitized, right? So that's like, websites that have a username and password box. If you type in your username and then a password, say the wrong one, followed by a single quote or 1 = 1, then when the SQL query does, it's like, find the user whose username is this and password is this, or if 1 = 1, that's good too. And it lets you log into the website as the administrative user or whatever without actually having the password.
Oh.
That's a classic simple SQL injection.
Yep.
With a blind SQL injection, the difference is you can't tell, basically you don't get the error message back, so you can't tell what you have to tweak in your injection to get the result you want. So basically, you just know that when you do, if the query returns true, this happens, and if false, this happens, right? And so it's a more complicated type of SQL injection. There are also blind SQL injections based on timing, right? Where you can tell, all right, it takes this long if it's working, and it fails immediately if it's not, right? So then by doing things like inserting code into the SQL query that causes that delay, you can tell whether things are happening or not, right? So you can be like, if the first letter of the password is equal to this, then delay for 10 seconds, otherwise return immediately. Then you just cycle that through trying the first letter of each possible letter for the beginning of the password, and then now by looking at those delays, you might be able to tell what the first letter of the password is, which is a good start. Right? Of course, that doesn't work if the password's hashed like it should be. They should never have plain text passwords in a database. But that's beside the point.
Well, it often is not.
Right, yes. And then cross-site scripting injection is basically where you can cause code from some other website to be embedded in your website.
Yeah.
And the scary part behind that means you can have some trusted website like CNN, and with a specially constructed URL or something, have code pulled in from a Russian hacker's website, and now everybody that goes to CNN can get infected.
Jeez. Yep.
Right, we've talked about this specifically happening before, yes.
Yep, we've seen it.
Yeah. And so anyway, the big news here is PunkSPIDER, which is basically a search engine connected to this giant database of all the vulnerabilities they have found.
That's pretty wild.
So you can go in and search for websites by keyword in the URL or the title of the website, and so show me all websites that have video in the name and are vulnerable to SQL injection, and then a list comes up.
This is pretty slick. So I just did that. Video, title, all the sites, and this is everything it's indexed. SQL, and then it has a little tally at the bottom of the result.
Yeah. How many different vulnerabilities they found.
4 SQL injections on MrFeature.com.
Yeah, so it kind of reminds me of something we've talked about before, which is Shodan, which is an online index of the banner messages you get when you connect to certain services. Like if you connect to a mail server on port 25, it usually spits out its version number.
Right.
And its host name and stuff.
Right.
Well, if you're looking like, oh, well, I happen to know that 2 versions old version of this mail server is vulnerable to an exploit. Well, you can go over to Shodan, type in that version number, and find all the mail servers on the internet that happen to be running the older version of the software you want to target.
It's a little freaky.
It was originally designed for finding industrial control systems that were open when they shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
That's when we first talked about it. Was I think it was the what was the name of that company? They got bought by the Germans. They were originally Canadian or something. It started with an R, I think. Anyway, they made these high security boxes, and when you connected to them over Telnet, they spit out their MAC address. And there was that password that was just like an MD5 of the MAC address.
Right.
And
crazy.
Or the MAC address malformed with a Perl script, but yeah. And then there's additional coverage about PunkSPIDER from an article at the Register.
Now, this is really, I mean, isn't this is the public shame approach in a sense, right? Because
partly, although the part of the idea is that it means that places that didn't know better can find out that they're vulnerable.
I suppose so. I mean, I've worked for...
Normally, someone like you would come along, or someone would have to call someone like you to have them come and test the website, and you charge a lot of money. And this one, we're going to test every website, and you'll be like, hey, you should fix this.
That company where I did the security audits for... they were building, when I left, a service like this, and they were going to charge like $1,200 a month, and basically you would contract with them. Now it would be private. So there's a big difference there. And they would scan the site once a month or once whatever the contract called for,
there's
do a report.
Like HackerSafe. Right? You see that on e-commerce websites.
And McAfee offers it too. And
that's the one that is McAfee.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay.
Intel. Yeah. Well, McAfee bought HackerSafe a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And that's when they started suing anybody that had something that looked like HackerSafe but wasn't quite.
And
anybody can stick a little green logo on their website and say this website is safe.
I don't know what it is, but I just see those, and I don't. That does not influence my trust.
Having had customers of mine use it and seen what the reports bring up, I don't trust them for anything either.
Really?
No.
Oh, jeez.
Or the fact that the worst thing they do is send a transparent pixel GIF.
Yeah.
If you don't match. So it never turns red. It's just either green or invisible.
Well,
I would want that though, because a false positive from them, which they throw all the time, scaring your paying customers off would be bad.
The other thing about this PunkScan is they've tossed the code up on Bitbucket.
Yes. PunkScan is a open source project. Yes.
So you could just download the TarGZ. It's 247 megabytes of Python.
It's a lot of Python. Eh?
It's a whole lot of Python, Alan. But I mean, so you could set up your own private indexer.
Yep.
And you could just...
I'm not sure, but I think you might be able to run a scanner from your side that contributes to their big database.
Oh, that's cool.
I'm not sure.
That's a really clever way. If they're not, they should take that idea and they should run with it. You know what? TechSNAP will give them that idea. You guys can just have it. Yes. Maybe give us a link. Yep. All right. Any other thoughts on the PunkScan?
Nope. We're ready for the next story.
All right. Well, we'll have links to that in the show notes. Okay. The next story. This is one I'm as somebody who's rapidly adopting SSD. Alan, should I be worried about power failures?
Partly maybe, but this is the first bit of research, so we don't know that much.
All right. Tell me what you got.
This is basically a study from the Ohio State University about how power failures affect SSDs. Now they kind of went with the worst case, and we're just trying to figure out what can happen because of a power failure to an SSD, not how likely it is that this will happen or anything like that.
Okay.
Right? It's just what can actually happen.
if the S hits the fan.
Basically.
Okay.
Yeah, so researchers at Ohio State University conducted an extensive test using flash SSD drives to determine how they react to unexpected power failures. They created a worst-case scenario that involved many worker threads writing to the disk at once using incompressible data because the FTL, the flash translation layer, which is the firmware on the SSD that makes it act or interface with your computer like it was a regular spinning hard drive, even though it's not.
Yeah.
They will oftentimes compress data because you can only write so many gigs to an SSD before it gives out. So if the data is compressible and you're writing less, then you don't wear out the flash as fast.
Uh-huh.
And it also means that when you're reading and writing it, you can do even higher speed, right? Because if you're compressing it, you're making the actual amount being written smaller. So you can get a higher transfer rate from it as well. Anyway, so they wrote incompressible data, and there's a PDF and a video that go with this, and they describe what the data they were actually writing was and how they fooled the compression algorithms and so on.
Okay, I'll pull those up.
Because it's actually really interesting, mostly because they had to test some of the stuff. They had to write data where they could tell what it should have been.
Right, of
They could
course.
tell when they half overwrite something and it got interrupted by the power failure, how much of it was the original and how much was the new stuff.
Right.
Right? And so they had to come up with this custom record format and find a way to pad it out to make it big enough and so on. So yeah, they're writing incompressible data, multiple threads really fast. And then the other thing they do is they cut the power to the SSD directly.
Oh, ouch.
Right? So they built this little circuit board that basically provided the power to the SSD and then took the power from the regular computer power supply and then could get turned on and off over a serial port. So this way, they were cutting the DC power directly to the drive the moment they wanted to. Rather than if you normally, if you just pull the power thing out of the back of a PC, there's, a bit of a capacitor and stuff. There might be just enough power to prevent some of the damage getting through to the hard drive.
Right.
Because the power supply has a capacitor in it and so on. It doesn't instant off. It kind of winds down really quickly, but still, you're talking like milliseconds could make a difference here. And they so ahead of time they kind of thought out what they thought the possible problems were. Right. So the possible failure scenarios they were expecting were bit corruption, which is just where random bits of the data written to the hard drive would be wrong. Right. So you go in and it's like a single bit would be off or something. Right. Mm-hmm. What's called a flying write, which is actually a holdover from regular hard drives. But basically it means the right data was written to the disk, but it was written to the wrong block or wrong sector or wrong location on the disk. Right? This comes from the older days of regular hard drives where the head would somehow be in the wrong spot when it wrote and basically overwrite the wrong sector. So there's a possibility that could happen in the SSD.
Huh.
What's called a shorn write. Basically means it got cut in half. So this is, you have your sector, right? And then you're writing new data to it and you're half done and then the power goes out.
Right.
So the first half of the sector is the new block and the second half of the sector is the old block. But when you read the whole thing as one block, it's basically just gibberish, right? Because it's two different bits of data.
That's called a shorn write?
Right. SHORN.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah. It's like, has to do with like it's a way to cut something or something, like a way that something would break. Mm-hmm. I don't know the exact word, but anyway. One of the other ones was metadata corruption, and that's where with that flash translation layer that's making the drive look like a regular hard drive, the data it uses to keep track of what's actually on the flash would get incorrect compared to what's on the flash.
That doesn't surprise me.
Which could cause all kinds of weirdness to happen.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
A dead device where the SSD just won't read or won't spin up anymore. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's not actually spinning up like a hard drive. And then another one is unserializability.
Oh.
Basically means that because they're doing multiple writes at once, they're telling the disk, this one, don't write the second one until the first one's done and so on, right? They're saying one at a time, serial format, right? But the disk might ignore that instruction and do, to be faster, try to do multiple things at once. So unserializability means if you're doing 3 writes, like 1, 2, 3, but on the disk you had one was done and 3 was done, but 2 never finished, then that would be unserializable, meaning that the data wasn't in basically at an impossible point in the timeline, right? You're going to do number 1, then number 2, number 3, but somehow 1 and 3 are done, but 2 was never done.
Right.
So they tested 15 different SSDs all over the spectrum. They tried MLC and SLC. And basically they tried prices ranging from 60 cents a gigabyte to $6 a gigabyte. Right? So right from the cheapest consumer ones up through the fancy enterprise ones. And they also threw 2 regular hard drives in just to see for comparison.
Oh, cool.
Now, they didn't release any manufacturer names or model numbers that they used because they're not really after trying to name and shame the people that did the worst. They were just trying to find out what happens.
Yeah.
But they found in some of the cases, the enterprise SSDs did the worst.
No kidding.
Which may be to do with the more complicated firmware. Like one thing they noticed is they're writing in 4 kilobyte blocks because that's what the block on the SSDs are normally, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they found that on some of them, they would end up with shortened writes that were happening and made it look like it was writing in 512 bytes, even though it was supposed to be 4K. Possibly that's the flash translation layer trying to make it seem like a regular 512 byte hard drive.
It does make sense. That's where a weakness would be.
Yeah. And things like that. But honestly, it looked like the regular hard drives fared very well, although there was one SSD that did even better. I'd really like to know which one that was.
Right? That's what I'm thinking. Can I buy more of that? Please tell us.
But yeah, I think they only had 1 or 2 where they managed to actually physically brick the SSD. But they also found that no SSDs ever ended up with a flying write.
Oh, okay.
So the SSDs never wrote the data to the wrong spot, which is good news.
Yeah. So
you don't want your drive to accidentally overwrite something. But they basically managed to encounter every other type of corruption. And in the PDF, they have a list of the different types and which of their different test drives ran into it. They also found in some of the SSDs, like some of the more expensive ones, they have a supercapacitor built into the drive, so the drive has time to finish writing everything even when the power goes out.
There you go. Now we're cooking with gas.
Feature.
Yeah.
Although I didn't have time to look to see how that affected some of the error rates. There's lots of graphs and stuff in there, and I didn't have time to watch the whole video. I watched about 15 minutes of it, maybe.
Yeah.
It's about 35 minutes, and it's quite a good bit of data, and there's some diagrams in there that I wish were in the PDF file that show, what a shortened write would actually look like as a diagram.
Yeah. I showed a couple of those while you were talking about them. We'll have, of course, linked in the show notes.
Yeah. So then there's some coverage from ZDNet, although they were pretty basic, right? Because it's
high-level
ZDNet
stuff, yeah.
And then there's a link to the PDF, and there's an insert. Basically, this is at the FAST13 conference. So at these conferences, they basically compile all these papers together, and you get like a book that's like this thick with all the papers in it.
Nice.
So they have to be sending quite a bit ahead of time.
Yeah, to print,
So he has a little handout slip that updates a couple of things that were incorrect or have changed since the original publication.
I like that.
There's a little errata slip that you can grab there that has updated or
a dedication to accuracy.
Yeah. Well, it's just a standard. The same thing was at Asia BSDCon. They do that because you could also buy the books from previous years.
So sounds like the answer is, in an absolute worst case scenario, you could have data corruption.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting.
It depends on the drive. Some of the cheaper drives were better, possibly because of less complex firmware.
That, I think, is maybe one of the more interesting takeaways from the study that we need to look at.
Yep.
Because it makes sense, more software, more crap.
Yeah, and it makes also, makes me like the idea of FreeBSD's NAND-FS, where the file system is talking directly to the flash chips without this flash translation layer. So it's basically a file system that understands that, no, this isn't a 1980s hard drive. Right?
Yep. That definitely needs that obviously needs to be done eventually. And so that's
they're working on it.
NAND-FS on FreeBSD.
Yep.
All right, Alan, why don't we take unless there's any other thoughts on that?
I just had a link when I mentioned the story to someone else. They had a link to a blog post from somebody whose MacBook, the SSD randomly started showing up as only being 34 kilobytes.
Whoa, no.
in their MacBook, and they can't boot it anymore. So basically, the drive is toast.
That's all you'd ever need.
Weird.
Yeah, what sucks about that is it looks like it's a MacBook Air. Yeah, it is. And those are hard soldered onto the motherboard. That's not a drive. You don't pull the drive out. Those
Right.
are chips
And
on the board.
also just compared to like a regular spinning hard drive, less luck of being able to recover some of or all of the data from it.
Yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, in a worst case scenario, I mean, you can go to like drive savers, they'll pull the platters.
Yeah, they pull the platters out and put them in the same drive or something. Well, you can't really do that with a flash.
No.
And, with this flash translation layer doing all kinds of weird things and wear leveling and stuff.
I mean, I wonder if you took the same board and you just took the chips, and put them on a new board.
Well, I don't know where the metadata is stored.
Yeah. And with the in the case of the MacBook, it's actually soldered into the motherboard. So you kind of SOL there. All right, well, let's take a minute here and thank this week's sponsor, GoDaddy.com. GoDaddy.com, longtime supporters of the TechSNAP program, because they know you guys out there are the exact audience that need to know about GoDaddy.com. And they have brought back the fantastic deal of a $2.95 domain, which also applies to transfers now, which is sweet.
Nice.
Transferring domains, have you done many transfers of domains into GoDaddy?
Quite a few.
Super slick.
When I first started, I didn't know any better and hadn't heard of GoDaddy and a bunch of other things, but the very first place I bought was the only place I could find that would let me buy a domain with a money order.
Oh, that's adorable.
Because I was like 15 and didn't have a credit card.
Didn't have a credit card, yeah. Yeah, no, I did.
And then I was with a different registrar after that would accept PayPal before that was popular.
Mm-hmm.
But they eventually just started ignoring renewal orders. So I paid for a renewal and they never renewed and my domain expired. And that's when I decided, hey, I'm going to switch everything to GoDaddy because they're not ever going to do that to me.
That is so funny. See, we now live in a world where that didn't happen. I mean, I guess it does still happen if you don't use our great sponsor. But before they really came around, it was the Wild West of domain name registrars, and I'd have clients that had registered at every different place you'd ever heard of, and
there were a couple that were really evil or like had no control panel. There's like no website to log into.
A couple where you could only. I had them where you just call up the ISP and just ask them to change it with no verification or nothing.
Yep,
you just call them up.
Hijack the whole domain.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely crazy stuff. So the transfer process into GoDaddy is really great. Use our code TECH295, $2.95. It's so easy. They have a very nice admin panel. You can go in there and you can check on the status. If you forgot to unlock the domain at the other place or have the wrong contact info at the other place, you can go update that stuff, and it's just one click button to then reinitiate the transfer process. They'll keep it open for 30 days for you. And at $2.95, when you use that code TECH295, not only does that transfer the domain, but it also renews it for a year. So you're getting the transfer and the renewal for $2.95 when you use the code TECH295, or use Go35 off 4. Go35 off 4 saves you 35% off anything you're doing on a first-time purchase over at GoDaddy.com. Thank you to GoDaddy for the long-time support of the TechSNAP program, and thank you for continuing to make the service better and better and easier to work with groups of people. If it's a 1-2-person team or a 10-20-person team, GoDaddy has always been the right solution. So check out GoDaddy.com, use TECH295. Mm-hmm. And thanks to GoDaddy for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. All right, Mr. Jude, let's move on. This next story is not that one. The firmware source code leak. Tell me about this.
So this is crazy. Some researchers were, I guess, just bumbling around the internet looking for FTP sites that would let them log in.
Bored.
And found one that was full of goodies.
Uh-oh.
So security researchers Brandon Wilson and Adam Kadul, or I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Kaudil, found some interesting things on an FTP server in Taiwan. So they don't mention whose FTP site it was because mostly because apparently the people that running, they've contacted them and they've not got back yet. And so the data is still sitting out there in the open. And so they don't want to bring attention to where it is.
Because it's still there.
Yeah. But on the FTP site, they found numerous goodies, including internal emails, system images, like ghost images of systems and stuff.
Oh, ouch.
High-resolution images of PCBs. So it's like trade secrets, like how to build the motherboard.
Yeah.
And Excel sheets loaded with private data that was not meant to be published.
All on the FTP.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I don't even know how you have internal emails just laying on an FTP site. Like
Almost like maybe a file server directory that's exposed via FTP or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And apparently maybe even anonymous FTP or like, something with a easily guessed username and password.
Ouch.
In addition to all that, they found a directory named code. Inside there was the complete source code, most of the source code for and the private key for the AMI firmware. So AMI, or American Megatrends, is like the first or second biggest manufacturer of BIOSes for computers.
Yeah, I think
so basically like half of all computers.
Yeah.
They started originally making their own, and then they started licensing it to this company called PCs Limited. You may have heard of them. They're called Dell now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They're like half of all computer BIOSes are built by these guys. And so they don't actually sell anything directly. What they do is they build the technology, license it, customize it, and then provide the source code to motherboard manufacturers who do up their version of it and print it on the chips and put it in the motherboard. So they provide these various... AMI provides their customers, which are the motherboard manufacturers, with the source code to build their version of the BIOS. And one of those guys just left it laying on an FTP site for everybody.
Wow.
According to AMI, the FTP site belongs to one of their customers. The private key that was there for signing it, which is the UEFI stuff, right? Where the BIOS has to be signed and the bootloader has to be signed, so that we can assure that this stuff isn't, so that it's secure, right? It's you can say that
is this the secure boot issued key? Like
this is kind of part of that. It's not secure boot.
Okay.
It's for signing the BIOS itself.
Okay.
To make sure the BIOS isn't fraudulent.
Okay.
But yeah, same idea. But it's a testing key that they give with every version for people to test with.
Right, that are building systems.
And in their documentation, it tells people don't use that key, right? Make your own key. But how many people follow these instructions, right? I'm sure their instructions didn't say leave the source code laying around on a public FTP server either, right?
Right.
So it's possible that this manufacturer or maybe others have used this test key that is now exposed, meaning that someone else could take the source code from that FTP site and that private key, modify it to be malicious, and then sign it and issue that as a fake update that would validate and be installed on all these machines.
C in the chat room says it's their key for doing firmware upgrades.
Yes.
Which was
so basically it signs the upgrade to say that this is valid from the manufacturer.
So then if you wanted to overwrite somebody with a bogus firmware,
you'd have to have a signature.
You'd need
so this is the test key for internal testing.
Right.
And each manufacturer is supposed to have their own separate key.
Right.
Some of them maybe not.
Yeah.
Right. Some of them might not have followed those instructions.
I mean, we just see that all the time.
Clear which way. Yeah.
We've covered stories where there's like, here's a key, or look at Universal Plug and Play. The horrible state it's in is because people just use the example code.
Yeah, or in the old example code even. Or what was the other one?
There was a key one specifically.
Some manufacturer that makes switches specifically for industrial control systems, and they had a default SSL certificate that you're supposed to replace, but nobody did.
It's funny, that's the
second.
second.
And so everybody had the private key for the SSL.
That's the second industrial control screw-up they reference in one episode.
It is. Well, they're the worst examples.
I know, it's horrible.
So if this key is trusted in the wild, right? So if some manufacturers still use this key, it means someone with access to the leaked source code could make a malicious firmware update that would be considered valid and maybe compromise the entire UEFI thing by basically, removing the check for secure boot or something.
Thank you to Vadus. It was rugged gear. That's what we were trying to remember. Rugged gear.
Yep. So a couple of quotes from the researchers. Worst case scenario is the creation of a persistent Trojanized update that would allow remote access to the system at the lowest possible level.
Wow.
Right? Some of these BIOSes have control over IPMI and things like that, right? Like we talked about for servers, where it gives you complete KVM access at the BIOS level, even when the machine's turned off. Right? So if you could Trojanize an update for that BIOS, you could take over whole servers with complete control. Right?
Yes. Wow.
Another possibility would be creation of an update that would render the system unbootable.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? You just fry the firmware.
Right. If you're just pushing out, bogus firmware, it's likely going to be a result.
So it would just be to the point where you'd have to either try to replace the BIOS chip or replace the entire motherboard.
Wow. And when you have BIOS update software, I mean, everybody every motherboard is now updated like with a Windows utility in a lot of cases. So you can just write to the...
Most of those ones have two, one read-write and one read-only as a fallback in case the one you run in Windows screws up.
Yeah.
But, yeah, not all the motherboards have that. I'm kind of spoiled because I only usually buy enthusiast-type motherboards that would have those extra features. Not, the ones Dell has probably don't always...
Right, no, definitely not. No, but like my Gigabytes... not only do they have dual BIOS, but there's like a button on the motherboard. You just push it and it resets the BIOS back to defaults. I don't know. I'm sure if you have a bad image, it resets it back to a bad image.
My shuttle that was designed for overclocking had a button like that where you didn't even have to open the case. It was on the back.
Just on the back. Yep. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, but my current motherboard has power and reset and stuff on the motherboard. So when you're working with it on a bench, not installed, you can power it up and stuff.
Dude, motherboards today are so awesome. But the problem is even if you hit that reset button, it's just going to reset it back to the defaults of whatever image you have on there.
Well, because part of the thing is, most people don't do a BIOS update. So if you manage to Trojanize the BIOS on a computer, the chance it would get overwritten with a newer update are like very, very slim.
Right, because once
I don't remember the last time I did a BIOS update.
You don't really mess with that.
5 or 6 generations ago when I had to update a motherboard in order to support a newer CPU.
Yeah, that's when I'll do it. Or if I'm building the box.
It was pre-dual core.
Maybe if I'm going to reload, if I'm going to like pave a machine, every now and then I'll do a BIOS update.
But because of the risk, you usually only do it if there's a specific bug you're trying to fix.
Or more memory support or more whatever. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Once you got it, you usually leave it.
Yep. So another quote from the researchers is, "This kind of leak is a dream come true for advanced corporate espionage or intelligence agencies, right? The ability to create a nearly undetectable permanent hole in a security system. If you could get the virus in the BIOS, so it rewrites itself if it gets removed, and your virus scanners don't scan your BIOS,
right?
So it would allow this access to be there forever."
Wow.
Right? So even if they, reformat the machines or something, then it's still going to be there. Even if, the machines are dumb terminals and just boot remote VirtualBox machines or something, like a dumb terminal, it would still be there. Right? Yeah. Even though the thing has no local disk, the virus is still there.
I have I'm just doing my quick inventory. I think the Skype machine you're on right now is on an AMI BIOS. What if somebody hacks us and then they steal a copy of the TechSNAP show? And wait.
Yeah, I forget which manufacturer it is, but I almost always buy Asus motherboards, so all of my machines have Asus BIOS.
Right.
And I forget if it's a Word or AMI.
That's like a scary scenario, like almost like from the movies, in a way.
Yeah. Well, we've seen some stuff that's almost, or at least this, not complex, but what's the word I'm thinking of?
It's like, well, I think the Rega Gear thing was pretty close.
Right, but I mean, like the code red and some of the Chinese stuff is just high level. What's the word I'm thinking of?
There's a lot of potential for exploit.
Right, but sophisticated.
So what it kind of shows me is, look how fundamentally vulnerable all of these systems could potentially become just because somebody set up an FTP site wrong and somebody stored the wrong files on it.
Yep.
And 2 stupid actions resulted in the...
possibly the compromise of the entire UEFI ecosystem.
I mean, it's just, it is...
Which goes to show some of the problems with the EUFI ecosystem, but...
That's where I was going. Yep, exactly. It shows you like just one little weak link in all of these little systems that have been set up, and we're screwed. And you see it with all these different aspects of security, and I guess now it's just something to be aware of until we see more people. Maybe we'll see a story where somebody actually exploits this, but it seems like one of those things that's more likely to get used.
We might have got lucky and the researchers found it first before anybody else.
There's that. And it seems like if somebody is going to use it, they're probably going to do it on the down low. They're going to be targeted. They're going to know what kind of machine it is. They're going to know what version. It's going to be a very specific type of attack, and those don't generally get a lot of
part of it could be is if the wrong people got their hands on this, they could just find, with the source code to the BIOS, they could just find other problems with the BIOS.
Or they could just say, well, we know that this bad firmware will work on 70% of the chips, and the ones that get flash where it doesn't work, they just get bricked machines, and we don't care. And so it could just be like that's something that happens too. And That would not be one you want to spread around your corporate network one Friday morning. Yeah. It's going to be a bad weekend. Alan, before we jump into the feedback, I just want to make a brief announcement here on the show. I'm very happy to announce we've launched the beta episode of Jupiter Broadcasting's newest show, all about Bitcoin, called Plan B, right? See, the B stands for Bitcoin. See that? Yep. Plan B. And our first episode went up last night. It'll be live on Tuesdays. Just go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com. It's up there right now, episode 1. And then join us on Tuesdays, jblive.tv at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. GMT. And we've just set up a subreddit over at reddit.com/r/planbshow. And we're looking to build a community there, and we'd love to hear your ideas for the show and have you take a listen to it and tell me what you think. So all that Bitcoin talk finally has a place to go because it's been like leaking into all of the shows. Yes. I know. I'm sorry about that.
Chris's enthusiasm gets everywhere.
Yeah. I think it might have even made it into SciByte somehow. I don't even know how that happened. Yep. All right. So there you go. You'll find it over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Plan B. But Alan, I think that's all the news, right?
Yep.
All right, then that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your feedback to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or pop in that contact link at the top of our website or start in a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Mr. Jude, are you ready for the first question this week?
Sure.
All right. It comes from Casper, and he says, "Hey, Chris and Alan, thanks a bunch for this and other great shows. I watch and hear them every time, and you always have something interesting to talk about. So here's the background. He's looking for a storage solution for home. He knows we talk about this on the show a bunch, but he feels his dilemma could use some input from us. As he mentioned before, he wants to have a storage solution, and he wants it to be ZFS. He's looking at NAS for free since it seems to have a very robust UI. However, he does not like its limitations. And he goes on to say he's also thinking about just throwing down and building a full FreeBSD box, but he thinks he might be getting in over his head. So he's got 3 scenarios he'd like our input on. A Linux host with NAS for free in a KVM guest instance. Not bad, something I might consider myself.
For when you're trying to do a file server, I'm a little iffy about that. Like, because basically you're virtualizing the disk. And
and it's the route I decided not to go with, right? My disk is a free NAS storage box. Then he's also considering FreeBSD with NAS for free running in a jail of sorts, or bite the bullet, go pure BSD with maybe some kind of GUI to fall back on or command lines if he can find it. He says, I don't really want to do ZFS on Linux. Doesn't seem like it's totally viable right now. Thanks from Denmark. Any solutions are appreciated.
Like NAS for free isn't really meant to run in a jail, so I don't know how that would work.
Yeah.
Probably not very well.
Yeah.
Free NAS is what I'm more familiar with and have met developers for and so on. They're working on an update to be using the latest version of FreeBSD 9.1 rather than they're currently based on the 8 branch. But the newer versions of FreeNAS have all the ZFS features, so it's not like it's missing anything.
Well, I just got this email this morning from folks over at IX Systems. Annie wrote and she says, "Hey guys, we just released FreeNAS 8.3.1-P2 earlier today, which features, among other things, ZFS encryption. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but we also relaunched a new freenas.org website. So go check it out, which they have. I didn't know they had a website. Oh, dude, it looks really, really slick, very pro. Yep. This FreeNAS thing looks like it's a full-on commercial solution. I'm really impressed with what they're doing.
That's what they're driving it towards. It's getting really fancy now. Because they're also working on they have what are called plugin jails, where it's basically a plugin system for you to add other apps to your FreeNAS. So specifically, most people that are using FreeNAS at home want to do a media center. Right, so it has a bunch of the stuff for that in a jail that you just deploy this onto your FreeNAS box, and all of a sudden it starts sharing the stuff to your whatever media devices, like like your Xbox or your Apple TV or whatever.
Anything that uses universal plug and play and DNLA, it'll support. Which is pretty much all the devices.
Yeah, like a PlayStation 3 will do it, Xbox will do it, your Apple devices will do it. Everything.
It'll also do what is it? Not I forget what the iTunes streaming music protocol is, but it'll do DAP. It'll do DAP too.
Yep.
So FreeNAS, has a great UI, very robust, full ZFS support. It's free. It's full on FreeBSD. Although I have learned you can't necessarily always go under the hood and tinker with things. You want to use the UI.
It's actually what's called NanoBSD, which is a FreeBSD with a bunch of stuff cut out to make it small.
Yeah, okay. To make it more of an embedded device.
Because some people will be running the FreeNAS part of it off like an SD card or a compact flash card or a USB stick. Right. So they want it as small as possible. Also, by default, it mounts most of the system read-only. So like your config files are actually a memory disk read from a read-only file system every time it boots. So if you make a change to the config file, if you don't copy those changes to the actual directory, then next time you reboot, your config changes are gone if you do stuff under the hood. So if you're going to tinker under the hood, you should read the manual.
I would say.
Mostly the reason for that is because if you have the file system mounted read-only, it means no matter what power failure type scenario you have, the file system is going to work when you boot up.
Yeah, and it's really cool that the whole thing fits on flash.
But part of it is, and they have it set up with upgrade stuff so that they can do an in-place upgrade without risking anything. So basically, they have 2 partitions, I think it is, and so they upgrade one of them, and then boot off of it, and if it doesn't work, you can fall back to the other one. Kind of like that we were talking about with the BIOSes, having 2 copies. And so, if you start playing under the hood, it messes up the upgrade path a bit.
To me, I would say Casper seems like he's comfortable. He was mentioning KVM, so it sounds like he's comfortable with virtualization. Download the FreeNAS ISO. It just released a new version today. Throw it in there. See how it looks for you. See if you like the UI. Attach a few fake drives and create a few fake volumes. And Bob's your uncle. See if you like it.
Yeah, I have more experience with FreeNAS rather than NAS for free. Some people, but as far as I know, FreeNAS is also much more actively developed.
Yeah.
And it has commercial support behind it by IX Systems if you need that.
Right.
Like if you're going to deploy it in a business environment and you need to know that in an emergency there's people you can call or whatever, that's.
In fact, that kind of leads us to the next question. So Seller Door writes in, and he says, "Hi, Alan and Chris. I've become a regular viewer of late and tried to join the IRC. I think he was in there, but he ended up having to go to bed. It's late in his area." He says, "You guys love ZFS, especially Alan, and I've looked into it, and it looks awesome. I have 2 questions. Do you know of any guides for setting up ZFS which are really easy to follow, explaining things very simply? And 2, I got wondering, since ZFS loves RAID arrays, could you create a RAID array on 2 64GB USB sticks on the Raspberry Pi? I love my Pi and use it as a server nearly 24/7, so 2 64GB sticks set up as a super resilient ZFS RAID sounds really awesome. Or if only in concept. Thanks for your advice and answers. Keep making the great show."
Well, first of all, if it's only 2 USB sticks, it's not super resilient, right? You can only tolerate one of the 2 disks failing. You would need to have 4 USB sticks if you want to be more resilient.
Very good point, Alan. Very good point. All right.
But the problem with doing ZFS on a Raspberry Pi is so little RAM. And also, I don't know if it's all been ported to work on ARM. I've not tried it. I might literally try it just for fun.
Oh, yeah, the RAM would probably be an issue, huh?
Yeah, well, not necessarily. You'd have to do a lot of tuning to get it to work. But yeah, so it's not really meant to run on a Raspberry Pi, and I don't know if it will work on ARM or not. Mostly because it's portable, so it should, but I don't know.
This could apply to Casper too. I would just like to make speaking of FreeNAS and IX Systems, I don't know if you guys remember a little while ago, but I bought one of their FreeNAS minis. If you go over
Is it TreeNAS or FreeNAS?
Huh?
Is it FreeNAS or TrueNAS?
The mini is FreeNAS.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
You can get it with TrueNAS, I think. But it's FreeNAS here, and they pimp the more home media sharing aspects of it on the so on the freenas.org site. They have it linked right there on the front page. This is like a FreeNAS hardware appliance. You order the drives you want. It comes shipped with FreeNAS, and you just keep upgrading it as you go. It does the streaming, all that kind of cool stuff. So that might be something if you can afford it, that might be a way for you to go. And
it's not like the hardware's expensive. Trying to buy the same hardware yourself will cost more money.
It's not expensive.
We've looked at it, and Scale Engine buys its servers from IX Systems now, rather than building them ourselves.
Oh, yeah?
Because they build them with the same things that we were.
That's awesome.
They buy the same Supermicro chassis and stuff. And
I really like the chassis. I really like. It's got a 4 drive bay in it. It's like a shuttle PC that can hold 4 drive bays in a hot swap bays.
Yep.
It's really nice hardware.
It is.
All right, Alan. Well,
so for his question about setting up ZFS, it's a file system. There's not much to set up, right? You create your Z pool, and then you create data sets on it. It's the most basic setup is like 2 commands. It's more complicated if you want to boot the OS off the ZFS pool, but even that is a couple of there's a 1-page wiki on it. But yeah, setting up the thing is literally Z pool, create the type you want, whether it's mirrored or RAID Z or whatever, and then a list of the drives, and it's done.
Very nice.
And then that's when the ZFS commands kick in, and you can create your multiple data sets and set, I want this one to be compressed, and I want this one to be deduplicated, and I want this one to have 2 copies of everything or whatever.
Chat room's kind of giving you a hard time, telling them you're setting them straight. Should we play a voicemail we got from T to the Z, who's often in the chat room? All right, let's listen.
Hi, guys. Love the shows. I've been listening to Jupiter Broadcasting since way before TechSNAP. I started just with Linux Action Show. I watched Coder Radio, TechSNAP, 9 Yards. Really love it. Thanks a lot for all of that. My question is as follows. One of the things that we have one of the main accomplishments with IPv6, from my understanding, is that we won't be using NAT and a lot of other translation type things, at least in the same way we use it for IPv6. My question is, isn't NAT and all these kind of things one of a very large factor in our security? Meaning, if our devices are not as accessible from the internet, using a public IP address. If IPv6, if everything is going to be public, from what I understand, then how does that security get addressed?
Right.
Thanks again, and really love the show.
So is everything in IPv6 public?
Well, yes, every IP is, but basically what NAT does is it's usually listed as a feature on the box as well, but what's called stateful packet inspection, which basically means when you connect out from behind the NAT, it creates the translation and says, hey, any packets related to this are allowed to come back in, but some random person from outside can't connect in, right? Because now in NAT, it's not necessarily a feature. The reason why when someone connects to your external IP on a port number that they don't get connected to your computer is because your NAT box probably has more than one device behind it, right? It doesn't know which one to send it to, so it just ignores it. Mm-hmm. Unless you have a port forward set up saying, hey, for this port, forward it to this PC. So basically, NAT provides that security because it doesn't know what to do with it otherwise. Now, you can just as easily have your firewall box do what's called stateful packet inspection, which is basically to apply the same rules, only allow me to connect out and related connections back in, but don't let random connections in. It's called stateful packet inspection, and basically every router's had that since before NAT.
There you go. Excellent. Very well put.
Yeah. So, no, you're not necessarily, as long as you have the same concept, right? A firewall or a router box that's doing stateful packet inspection, it would be exactly the same, except for your IP addresses would be routable instead of not.
I like that. Thank you, Alan, for the clarification.
So, no, IPv6 isn't going to massively expose everybody's cell phone as long as they're behind a firewall the same way they were with NAT.
Right. And we have a make good. You want to get to that?
What?
DR writes in, he says, just a minor annoyance. It's Krebs on security, not Curbs. I work in radio, not on air, by the way, but he works in radio, so he knows that getting feedback on minor pronunciations can be very annoying. But after hearing Curbs a few times, he couldn't hold back. Love the show, though. I use the affiliate links whenever I make Amazon IT purchases. Well, thank you for doing that. That, by the way, if you do IT purchases, thank you for using those. Oh, go ahead. What?
At least it wasn't Krebs that was yelling at us.
I know, right? So, okay. So, Krebs. Am I saying Krebs? Am I saying that right?
Yes, it's because it's Kreb, not K.
Right, not Curbs.
RB.
And you know why? I think I started Curbs. I think I started saying it because I saw Kerberos. I saw Kerberos. And so I think I started it. Yeah, because I think I glanced at the word and Kerberos stuck in there, and then it was associated. So thank you, DR, for correcting me. We'll do a make good. And just because he uses our affiliate links, I'm willing to accept the shame on that. So I apologize there. All right, Mr. Jew. Well, that's the feedback for this week. If you want to get your question into the show, email us, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or hit that contact link, or start a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv, and we'll try to incorporate your question. We always love getting your questions, and we always try to get a few of them in every single episode. But Alan, with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make it to the very top of the show. We still want to talk about them, maybe give you some links to follow up on after the show. And a lot of these links are supplied by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Okay, Jan, why don't we kick off the Roundup? I'll take the first story. And this one goes out to our Brazilian audience, if we have very many out there. A lot of you might be finding that your Windows box is unable to boot after a botched Windows update. Microsoft has confirmed one of the Windows updates that went out on Tuesday is preventing computers from booting. The company said the issue is only appearing on Brazilian computers, but it hasn't explained why. The update to watch out for is KB2823324, which replaces ntfs.sys.
Ooh.
No. Yeah. So there you go. Watch out. And so far, there's not a clear solution from Microsoft, but the community has come up with a way to recover in some circumstances using a Linux Live CD.
Right, because there should be a backup of the old NTFS.sys.
Yeah,
so if you mount the NTFS
get a Linux CD with NTFS 3G on there.
Yeah.
And you might be able to save yourself. So we'll have
or there's a couple of the live CDs that have stripped down versions of Windows, or at least BART PE, or there's lots of ways. But I'm glad that didn't happen to me.
All right, now the next roundup story is a little more about the Apache module attack that you covered a while ago.
Yes, so basically Ars Technica is basically posting an update about the Apache hijack that's targeted at least 20,000 different websites. And this is one where basically it's loading a module into Apache that's injecting the malware silently. And remember, this is the one that's really sneaky, where it doesn't inject the malware if anybody's logged in over SSH, and it knows the IPs of the admins from their logins over SSH and doesn't ever show them the malware.
Right.
So the admin gets this report that some website on their server has malware. So they go to the website, look at the source code, no malware. So they're like, oh, it must be on the user side or something, right? And so they dig, and it turns out that no, the malware is there, just the malware is smart enough to hide from them.
And what's interesting too is they go on to say that these rogue Apache modules, not only will the code they're injecting change just about every time it injects it, so it's always changing the links, but they said that since late 2012, people have sent, this is according to the researcher, new versions of the malicious module. So he believes that this malware is still in what's considered active development, and he believes that people are seeing a high payoff, and it's expected this to continue to spread, and that it affects, right now, by his count, anything version 2.2.22 or higher of Apache on pretty much most Linux distributions.
Right. Well, it's because I don't know any Linux distributions other than really old CentOS that comes with 2.0. 2.2 has been the standard for like a long time.
Right. Yep.
Like 2.4 is finally out now, but the biggest news story with this is they still haven't figured out how they're getting the module in there.
Yeah.
How they're compromising the machines in order to load this module.
I mean, there was that SSH.
So basically, it's like a zero-day exploit for something, and they haven't figured out what yet.
We know there's the SSH rootkit that in some cases is being used.
But again, that SSH rootkit, how are they compromising the machine to install the rootkit in SSH?
It's
right? They have to get into the SSH first before they can implant the version that steals your password.
I bet you it's like a grab bag. Like there's like a dozen different ways they get it on there, and all that matters they use one of them, right? And so that's why it's not one approach, I bet.
Possibly.
All right. A little bit of bad news on the roundup here. 2013 CISPA passes the Intelligence Committee and is headed to the House for a vote. This is only a slightly modified version of last year's failed Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act, and it has been voted through the House Intelligence Committee with an 18-2 victory, which means that's pretty much it.
This is the one that was big uproar, and we managed to get it knocked down last year. And so, let's just wait a year and people forget and not care.
And there's really been no major overhauls. There's been some I guess what people are calling minor improvements, but it's still essentially you share all of customers' information with us in the name of national security, and we indemnify you from any legal action. Essentially, kind of what we've set up with the telcos, so that way they can just spy on us all, and then they're indemnified from any of that. wonderful, and it looks like it's moving right along.
Mostly, it also protects them from, in certain cases where they're asked to give information and they do, and it turns out the government didn't have a warrant for it, and the company is supposed to want to see the warrant first, and it's just grr.
Did you get the emails about the Voodoo streamer accounts getting hacked?
Well,
I guess the servers were
stuff being submitted to us.
Oh, I actually got emails from them.
Well, I'm not a customer with them, so I wouldn't have.
Unfortunately, I am. So this is pretty wild, man. They actually had unknown perpetrators break into their offices and steal freaking servers.
Apparently, yes, Voodoo, VUDU, had their offices broken into, and they stole the servers. Rather than trying to hack in and steal the database, they just stole the database server.
Yeah, it included the hard drives that contain customer information with names, email addresses, postal address, phone numbers, account activity, dates of birth, and the last 4 digits of some credit card numbers.
Right. Now, although the credit card numbers themselves, the full credit card number, were not stored at the office, so they weren't stolen.
That's good.
Yeah.
All passwords have been reset. They've reset everybody's account. Yeah, I signed up with Voodoo because they were one of the first to offer high-definition online streaming, and I got a Boxy box, and I got 30 days free, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Whatever. All right.
It's interesting because at first I was wondering if this was one of our customers, but that's VODO, which is they do indie movie video on demand.
Right. And I guess by the way, if you use the Voodoo service via Walmart, which I guess a lot of people did, you were not included in the breach. It's like if you linked your Walmart video account with Voodoo, you're fine. Which I guess is like the majority.
It just had the link rather than the your actual profile information.
All right.
But yeah, it goes to show that on top of network security, you also need physical security.
Absolutely. Now on the next roundup one here, Rapleaf is back and bad as ever. What is Rapleaf?
So basically, they're one of the advertising networks that basically collects information about you. Specifically, they look like they pay Facebook app developers money in exchange for information about their customers.
Oh, shady.
Yeah. And most importantly, one particular researcher here opted out of their service. So said, stop tracking me. And they're like, okay, we'll stop tracking you. And then he managed to find out that they had continued to collect information on him, including from third-party Facebook apps.
This one's iMessage making it 2 weeks in a row in the roundup. iMessage denial of service prank spams users rapidly with messages, crashes iOS messages app.
Yes. So basically, it's a denial of service attack. Basically, by sending your phone a bunch of iMessages, it causes iMessage to freeze or crash, and then you don't get any more iMessages.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just a related follow-up. Last week we talked about how the iMessage service couldn't be wiretapped. That's actually literally what they meant. So traditionally, law enforcement can work with the telcos to tap your line, like I just insinuated. And that includes your text messages. In fact, the telcos store the text messages. Law enforcement is able to log into a portal and actually able just to retrieve them. However, because things like iMessage, and I would assume Google Voice too, they go over Apple servers over IP.
What's the name of the other one that's separate? It's like a SMS replacement.
There's a few. There's like a Snapchat.
Isn't
Snapchat?
No, it's a bigger one that we've talked about security issues with before. I think it started with a W.
Oh, WhatsApp, right? Is that what?
Yeah, WhatsApp.
Yeah. The great examples all run over servers. So what that article was actually saying is that the FBI or the Drug Enforcement Agency can't just walk up to AT&T and go, hello, we'd like Mr. Fisher's text messages. They have to go to Apple and ask for it. That's the difference.
Well, and we covered a couple of weeks ago, in Canada, it was ruled that they can't do that without a warrant in Canada.
Oh, Canada.
Although that was more, that ruling was a little bit more, sorry, there was actually two. One was about when the police actually have your phone in their hand, they search you.
Yeah.
They can't go through it or make you give them the password. And then separately, there was a case where they wanted the text messages, since they were stored by your phone provider for a minute between when it's sent and received, and they wanted to be able to access those without a warrant. And
whoa,
the
really?
court was like, no.
I think Verizon stores them for like a year.
I think at this point, it's like, they store them until it gets confirmed that it was received by the other side, right?
Right.
I don't know if they actually keep a full log or not. But anyway.
Speaking of that topic, our next story in the roundup is an article here from the EFF about the Stingray cell phone tracking. when a warrant isn't a warrant.
Yes, Stingray is basically this device the U.S. government has that pretends to be a cell phone tower and has your phone connect to it, sometimes having it disable encryption, and basically allows them to eavesdrop on your calls or intercept your calls or route your phone weirdly or whatever they want to do.
Now, remember, we've talked about this in the context of like those bring your own cell phone boosters and how you could use one of those to hijack people's calls, and this is basically what they're doing.
Yes, a government version of this that they use to capture people's, they're like, oh, we're looking for this specific IMEA number, and then we'll bind it to our fake cell phone tower.
That is, I feel like a schmuck.
Apparently they're doing that without a proper warrant.
Surprise, surprise.
So
and here
EFF
I was...
and the ALCU are jumping on their head about it.
Here I was worried about bad guys doing it. Turns out
it's
just the FBI.
Because we on a really, really, really old episode of TechSNAP, we talked about what it would take to build your own for like $1,000 that would pretend to be a cell phone tower and would tell everybody's phone not to do GSM encryption. Even though all cell phones are supposed to warn the user, hey, if you link to this cell phone tower, it won't have encryption. Most phones didn't bother because there's no real cell phone towers that don't have encryption. But when they find the fake ones.
All right, and you have a story here about a developer who purposely leaves vulnerable applications online and then tells us about it.
So specifically, he was... it's called a blog for Schemaverse, and he has a Postgres server, which is a database server. Yeah. And there was an exploit found for it, and he decided he had a non-production database, and he decided to just leave it for a while to see what would happen, leaving it with a known vulnerable version. In less than 24 hours, someone had started writing files into his file system telling him he should upgrade.
I like that the first person that got in was just like, hey, man, by the way, I totally hacked your crap. You might want to fix it.
Yeah.
I love the internet. Mm-hmm. All right.
But, if it had been someone else, they could have just erased all his databases.
Oh, yeah. No, I know. Yeah, that's that. Yeah. Ubisoft's Uplay service hacked. Oh, no. Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon leaked.
Yes. So Uplay, which is basically, I guess, Ubisoft's competitor to Steam or Origin or what other services, was hacked. And basically, they found a way to make it so that they could get games for free. So they were getting a whole bunch of different games for free. And while at it, they managed to find a game that wasn't out yet and get a copy of it.
Okay. Can I just say all of these companies need to knock it off? Just use Steam. Their core competency is delivering an online store that is multi-platform and works pretty damn good. All of you...
Well, it also brings up an issue with DRM. In this case, Ubisoft has taken Uplay down until they can solve these issues.
Oh,
so
no.
Does that mean if I bought a game off Uplay, I can't play it until
they authenticate?
Possibly. I don't know the detail for sure, but it would seem that would be the case.
That's making my blood pressure go up, Alan, just thinking about that. I'm getting all kinds of upset. I'm getting Diablo 3 flashbacks right now. Do not like that. All right. Wow. I wish these guys would just figure it out. They're game companies, not infrastructure companies.
Yeah.
Morons. All right. This last story in the roundup almost started an international war, Alan.
Not quite.
No. I keyed.
Probably started a panic, though.
I missed tweet fire, I guess you could call it, right? Tell me about this.
So the Japanese Crisis Management Office has a Twitter account that they use to publish important news bulletins or something.
Everything has to go on Twitter.
Right, because, it's crisis management.
Right.
Well, they accidentally tweeted that the DPRK, which is North Korea, had launched missiles that were then headed for Japan. They were trying to test their ability to inform the public, and it wasn't meant for the tweet to actually be posted, and it was.
So here's my question.
And about 20 minutes later, they deleted the tweet and posted an apology.
It took them 20 minutes? Oh, my
God. Well, they
gosh.
probably didn't realize at first until they started getting phone calls or something.
No, so they were probably scheduling it because they're all getting it set up for when the big show is going to happen. They went into Hootsuite, and because in Hootsuite, you can just schedule a tweet. And they said, okay, let's get. And then instead of hitting schedule, they hit send, because I do that all the time. So I'm sure that's what happened.
Something like that.
Yeah, I think it's so funny. Their test tweet was they're firing missiles, not test.
Well, no. So see, they were setting up for this, and it wasn't supposed to get posted.
Okay, like if it happens, like an automated tweet.
I guess the real thing is that if you're going to do a test, make sure you say this is a test at the beginning of your tweet.
Maybe they just wanted to have the thing so that way, if they were attacked and nobody was around to push the button, it would send automatically. Maybe that's what it was.
Or something. Who knows?
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that brings us to
But
the
anyway,
end.
CNET has an article that probably has more detail because I didn't read it all.
Right. Well, there you go. That's okay. It came and went, Alan. It was not a big international incident as it could have been. All right. I think that brings us to the end of this week's episode of TechSNAP. Don't forget to go check out Plan B, our new Bitcoin show that I'm pretty happy with, and it was getting a great response online, so we'd love to get your feedback. Also, don't forget, if you go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, at the bottom of our site down there, we have links for Amazon and Newegg and ThinkGeek and Best Buy. We also have extensions for Chrome and Firefox. If you click those links or grab those extensions, when you shop at one of the aforementioned sites, a portion of your shopping session is automatically contributed to Jupiter Broadcasting. We use that to pay the things like the bills and help afford things like Linux Fest Northwest. We're going to have Linux Fest. I got stickers right here. See that? I got a sticker for Linux Fest Northwest. So more information about that will be coming up soon as well. All right, Alan. Well, one last note I want to share with people before we get out of here is they can join us live over at jblive.tvs at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Boom, over at jblive.tv for the video or jblive.info for the audio, which is great for you cube dwellers or commuters. That way you just get the audio version. We have a 128 kilobit stream and a 64 kilobit stream, which has been specifically tuned just for your 3G connection while you're on the road. Well, there you go. Who needs radio? You got TechSNAP over at jblive.info. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.